Hi, it's Meredith from FastGrowingTrees.com, and I'm going to teach you how to do a base map for your landscape design only using Google Maps. So this is very helpful for properties that maybe have been existing there for a while, so they're actually uploaded into Google Maps. This is also helpful if you're doing it by yourself. Maybe you don't have the equipment to measure. You can actually do it remotely using some of Google's measuring tools online. It's not exact, but it will give you a really good starting point, especially when you're doing a larger landscape design. So what you will need is a computer and of course Google Maps, as well as your address, and you need a ruler, some pens and pencils, and then also something to mark down on. I chose graph paper just because it's easier to map out, but you can also use just normal plain paper as well. So let's get started. Once you are on your computer, you are going to type in google.com/maps, and it brings you to a screen like this. We're around Charlotte, so that's why it has it here. But we want to go up into this top left-hand corner and type in our property address. So for this example, I'm doing 502 Banks Street in Fort Mill. And Google Maps is going to zoom in on that location and mark it in red. And then it's also going to bring up a side panel here on the left that has more information about the property. I'm just going to hide this by clicking this arrow. That way we can see more of the maps and get more accurate measurement on the property. But for now, let's just get used to the controls that Google Map has. So to move your map around, you just click and drag, click anywhere and drag. We're going to center up our property. And next we'll want to zoom in. So in the bottom right-hand corner, we click the plus button. If you want to zoom out, you can click the minus button. That way we can clearly see our property as well as the property lines. Depending on where your house is, how new it is, how old it is, you might not have the property lines. If that is the case, just estimate the best you can. And the other part of the control you will need to know as far as the map view goes is how to toggle between satellite and the normal map view. Satellite is down here. It's a picture of trees on the bottom left-hand corner. When I click it, it just gives me a bird's eye view of the property, so I can see a little bit more detail about the house and some trees, driveways, sidewalks, that sort of thing. But for now, let's go back to the satellite view, just clicking on that same button. And the last thing you need to know is actually how to measure. And so what you are going to do is you're going to right click anywhere on the map, and it's going to give you some options, and down at the bottom here it says measure distance. You're going to click on that, and it gives you this point that you can drag to the corner of your property, for example, or anywhere you would like. And then you click a distance away, and it's going to automatically measure that for you. It's super handy, and this is how we're actually going to measure the rest of our property. So we can drag it along just like this. Be careful not to click a third point, because when you do, it gives you a cumulative measurement. We are not looking for that. We're just looking for one side at a time. So to exit out of this mode, we just right click again and hit clear measurement. The last thing that will be helpful as far as navigation goes is to right click again and print this screen. This makes it easy to take notes. Say if you have a very curvy property or lots of lines and measurements to do, you can simply just print this out, or if you don't have a printer available, just take notes on a piece of paper. Now that you know the controls, let's actually start measuring. So we're gonna pick a corner of our property, and again, if you don't have these property lines, just guess the best you can. We're gonna right click, hit measure distance, make sure that that point is right on the corner of our property there, and we're just gonna start measuring. So click here, and don't read this measurement. This is just on its way to the final measurement. This is your final measurement by that second point. So I'm going to write it down on my notebook here that is 97.11 feet. And you can either right click and clear the measurement, but my preferred method, now I have to. My preferred method is just to click and drag, so I'll show you this second time. So measure distance, go to our second point here. This is 125 feet, 0.27. And now we're gonna click and drag. So we click that first point and just drag it to our next point. And see how this property is a little bit weird. It has that weird corner. You just wanna go line by line and take your time with it. So this one is 64.93, and continue with this one. And this is our last little bit, connecting it back to where we started. And it looks like that measurement is 99.64 feet. So now that we have our property border measured out, we can now zoom in on the house. We don't want to measure the house from this view because this house in reality isn't just a square. So we want to get more details, and that's where this satellite view comes in handy. So we're going to click on that picture in the bottom left-hand corner. It switches us to the satellite view. And now we still have this measuring tool. We're just going to measure the house. So we're going to clear this measurement out and start measuring around the house. And again, this might not be exact, but it's okay if you're not exact. It just gives you a good idea and a starting point. So that side of the house looks like it's 38.83, and it's the same process before, one by one, side by side, measuring out the house as best as you can, just from knowing it in person, but also what you can see on Google Maps. We're going to account for this dip in right here. It looks like it's not too far. Okay, and the last little bit, oh, just kidding, we have this little indentation here. Up here. And now this is our last little bit. Okay, so now that we have the house complete, we're going to clear that measurement out, and we have to now track to the large trees. This would also be the time to measure anything like a pool or a shed. We have the property mapped out and our house, but we need to know where to put them in relation to one another. We can't just draw the house way up here in our base map, because then our landscape would be off. So the easiest way to do this is similar to how you would orient a tree within your landscape. We need to go off of the corners using right angles to measure how far it is from the property lines. And again, in Google Maps, on this basic view, we can't see the details of the house, so don't measure off of this view. We want to actually measure off of this view. And remember, you can toggle between the two different views, clicking this when you're measuring. So that's what we're going to do now. So starting with this corner, we're going to measure the distance, and because I can't see the property line clearly, I'm going to measure out here just a 90-degree angle, best I can. Record this measurement. So that's our first one for the first corner, and remember, ignore this house because it's a generalized shape. And then our second measurement will be from this property line. All right, there we go. So 73.31 is our second measurement. So this will give us a good point on the map where our corner begins of our house. So now we know where to orient the house within the landscape, within the property, in relation to one another. If you have a house with a lot of corners, you may want to do this with several corners just to double check your measurements and make sure that it's situated correctly, especially if it's not completely square to the property lines. But that is how you would measure the house and the property and know where they are together. Now that we have the property mapped out as well as the house, we need to map out specific structures. So this would be a patio, a deck, pool, driveway, anything like that where it's unmovable in your landscape. We need to make sure that it's oriented correctly on our map. So So the easiest way to do this is actually go to the view where it looks like a bird's eye view and you can see details. It's the same view that we measured the actual house in, and we can look and see, okay, this has a pretty large shade tree on our property, and we need to make sure that we have that labeled on our map. So the easiest way to measure this is to use two measurements for that one point, and then we're going to measure the canopy. So how we do this is we first start our measurement by right-clicking and hitting measure distance, making sure that that point is right in the center of the tree, so right where the trunk would be. And I'm actually going to switch map views. This way we can clearly see the property line, and we're going to just measure straight out, keeping those right angles so it's easier for us to measure later. So on our map we're going to say, okay, this tree is 11.7 feet from our property line. And then the second measurement is from this property line, again keeping a right angle, and I only moved that other one because we know that this point is on the tree. So we're going to record 50.58 feet down from that property line. It's kind of like Battleship. So now that we have the tree measured and we have where the trunk is located, we now need to locate how much of the yard this tree will shade, because we can tell compared to the house it's a pretty large tree and it's going to shade a good amount of our property. There's two ways to do this. You can either just look up the type of tree and how wide the canopy gets. This would be good if you, for example, had a younger tree. This tree is pretty old, it's pretty grown, so we're just going to measure it virtually here on Google Maps. So again, starting our measurement by right-clicking, and we're going to drag it to the end of the canopy, which I'm approximating right there, and then we're just going to measure to the other side. And we can see it's about 60 feet, so 59.19 or 57.19. And that will be the circle around the trunk. And that way we know that that much of our property is shaded out by this particular tree. To exit out of the measurement, we right-click, hit clear measurement, and once we do this for all of the trees on the property or other structures, you now have all you need to make your base map. Now that we have all of our notes taken down from the measurements in Google Maps, we need to draw our final base map. Here I have graph paper that is 1/4 of an inch. That way my scale is very easy to draw. If you're using just normal paper, you can use a ruler, which is what I would recommend, or you can invest in a scale ruler. I don't think they're that expensive, but a standard ruler would work fine. In this case, we want to note our scale, which will be 1 square is equal to 1/4 of an inch. And in reality, that's going to equal 5 feet. This way we can make sure that when we're drawing structures like a tree or our house, that they aren't bigger or smaller than they actually are in the real life. So, starting with the property line, the ruler really is just here to help me draw straight lines. Again, if you're drawing on normal paper, you would actually use the measurements here. But since it equals 5 feet, we're just going to fill in the blanks, starting with the outside property. Now that we have our property lines mapped out, we can now fill in the house. We measured the location of the house, so let's make sure it's oriented correctly. Mine was 5.5 almost in, at least according to this scale, and about 12.5 up. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5, and then count 12 up. So that's about half. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Right, so right here is our corner of our house that we're going to start. And now we just fill in the house. And if your house isn't completely squared to your property, make sure that you measure additional corners that all the points line up. So now I have drawn in my house. I did make a mistake there, but nothing that a little correction can't fix. I'm going to label that house, and because we aren't landscaping within our house, just ignore this line right here. So now that we have our house here, we need to orient our tree. So same thing, we need to count over and down to orient the trunk of our tree with a dot, and then we'll do the canopy around it with a circle. So I'll show you what that looks like with this one tree. So here we'll go over and down. So this is where our trunk is, and then the canopy we need to draw, and this is actually where a ruler can come in handy, because I know 1/4 of an inch. We'll just go to this side and make sure that we center it on our trunk here. So this is approximately how big our tree is, and canopies aren't perfectly circle, so this is not going to be perfectly circle either. There we go. So this is a large shade tree for this property, but now that we have it denoted, we can make sure that we plant shade-friendly plants underneath this. And now you have your base map. Make sure to label anything else that you need to label, such as a driveway, other trees, using that same method. And then a good thing to do as well is to label which way is north, and you have your base map ready to go for your landscape design.